Protesters here in D.C., in New York, across the country, they've settled on a nickname for the president. They've been calling him Genocide Joe.
People can say what they want on the sidewalk, and we respect that. That's what the First Amendment's about. But this word genocide's getting thrown around in a pretty inappropriate way by lots of different folks.
The word genocide getting thrown around in an inappropriate way by lots of different folks. That was a statement by National Security Council spokesman John Kirby. He's getting pretty irked over the fact that more and more Americans are in fact describing Israel's relentless bombardment of the Gaza Strip as genocide. But they're not the only ones. Historians and yes, genocide experts themselves have also been weighing in on this issue. And I think it's important to give them a voice and kind of look at the evidence that we have as of today in regard to the actions of the Israeli Defense Forces against Gazans in the Gaza Strip. Now, with that said, we're going to hear a little more from the experts in just a moment. But first, we should hear more from Kirby.
What Hamas wants, make no mistake about it, is genocide. They want to wipe Israel off the map. They've said so publicly, more than one occasion. In fact, just recently. And they've said that they're not going to stop. What happened on the 7th of October is going to happen again and again and again. And what happened on the 7th of October? Murder, slaughter of innocent people in their homes or at a music festival. That's genocidal intentions. Yes, there are too many civilian casualties in Gaza. Yes, the numbers are too high. Yes, too many families are grieving. And yes, we continue to urge the Israelis to be as careful and cautious as possible. That's not going to stop, from the president right on down. But Israel is not trying to wipe the Palestinian people off the map. Israel's not trying to wipe Gaza off the map. Israel's trying to defend itself against a genocidal terrorist threat.
Now, Kirby is right about one thing. What Hamas carried out on October 7th was vicious. It was absolutely horrific. And the way that innocent civilians in Israel were targeted, kidnapped, tortured, burned alive, absolutely should be condemned, absolutely should be called out. And Hamas specifically, should pay the consequences for this. However, Kirby's whataboutism, i.e., what about Hamas, really deflects from the actions and the statements that have been pouring out of the Israeli side of this war. And I just have a problem with, on one hand, rightly condemning the slaughter of children and innocent civilians on the Israeli side, while simultaneously downplaying and providing cover for the absolute annihilation of civilians on the Gazan side, on the Palestinian side. Oftentimes that part of the story seems to be completely ignored by our State Department and most members of our corporate media, to be sure. And so I want to just remind everyone, Israel has engaged in a medieval siege and terror bombing of Gaza. That has been going on for weeks on end. 1.5 million Gazans have been internally displaced to the southern part of the Gaza Strip. The south of Gaza was supposed to be safe, according to the IDF, which basically forced the evacuations of these Palestinians in the northern side of Gaza. But it also decided to engage in airstrikes in the south as well, as we've all known, as we've been talking about. And now we're hearing that they're going to intensify the bombardment of southern Gaza as well. Okay. And yes, there has been some hostage negotiation, which will potentially lead to a pause of several days in the bombing, so the hostage exchange can happen, but then they're going to go right back to bombing. The IDF has made that clear. Israel has made that clear. We're going to get to that story later on in the show. And Gazans have, of course, been denied the essentials for life. Okay, food, water, the fuel necessary for the hospitals to operate and function appropriately. And speaking of the hospitals, there are no longer hospitals in the Gaza Strip that can take care of the wounded, the ill, individuals who, through no fault of their own, are now victims of this ongoing brutal war, which has led to, of course, this relentless aerial bombardment by Israel. Now, with that said, as part of a hostage negotiation deal, hostage exchange deal between Israel and Hamas, there will be a pause in Israel's bombings just for a few days. The administration, though, is worried about the unintended consequences of that pause. And I want to give you a statement or an excerpt I read in Politico today that should be concerning for anyone who actually gives a damn about humanitarianism and the lives of civilians in the Gaza Strip. There was some concern in the Biden administration about an unintended consequence of the pause, that it would allow journalists broader access to Gaza and the opportunity to further illuminate the devastation there and turn public opinion on Israel. Now, as we all know, public opinion on Israel, for the first time in my career at least, has been far more mixed than what we've experienced previously. And it's because we've already seen some of the devastation taking place in Gaza. We've seen the hospital bombings. We've seen the children's bodies dismembered as they're laying on the ground on top of rubble. We have seen heartbreak, absolute torture. We have seen half of Palestinians lose their home because their homes were bombed. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So what this excerpt from Politico makes me wonder is, how much worse is it? What kind of destruction and brutality have we not seen yet? So much so that the Biden administration is concerned that if they pause the bombardment for a few days, journalists might be able to reveal the extent to which the Palestinians have been devastated and slaughtered in the Gaza Strip. But there's more. The devastation absolutely is real. According to the Financial Times, satellite images do in fact show that half of the buildings in northern Gaza have been destroyed, and the IDF is headed for the southern region of the Gaza Strip to do the same. The full extent of the damage has been estimated using radar signals collected from the European Space Agency's Sentinel-1 satellite. Corey Schur, the Cooney Graduate Center, and Hammond Van Dyke Hoek of Oregon State University used algorithms to calculate how many buildings have sustained damage to at least 50% of their structure since the war began. So look, even if Gazans are allowed to go back to the northern region, they're allowed to go back to their homes, there are no homes to go back to. What is the plan after the bombardments end? And even the US State Department has made clear that they are concerned there really isn't a plan in place. And the Biden administration, which has greenlit everything that you've been seeing and experiencing in regard to this story, is now saying, look, if Israel's planning on occupying Gaza, they would be making a big mistake. But the real question is, what is Biden gonna do about it? Because so far, talk has been very cheap. And the finger wagging hasn't been so persuasive toward Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right government in Israel. Israel is now turning its focus east into Gaza City and further into southern Gaza. Over the weekend, Palestinians reported heavy bombardments in Zaytun and the Jabalia refugee camp. And the UN said several explosions had taken place at schools where civilians were sheltering. Hospitals, schools, refugee camps, UN buildings. Israel's defense minister vowed this weekend that the war would spread to the rest of Gaza soon. Quote, people who were on the western side of the city have already encountered the IDF's lethal strength, he told Khan Radio. People who are on the eastern side understand that this evening. People who are in the southern Gaza Strip will understand soon as well. But there's more. Nearly all of Gaza's 2.3 million civilian population is now living in southern Gaza below the evacuation line, a forced migration that Palestinians, like that of the Nakba, liken that to the Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic. And so think about that, okay? People had evacuated to the south. So the all of the Gaza Strip was already densely populated. But think about the high civilian death toll as the intense bombardment was taking place in the northern portion of the Strip. Now consider the fact that all of these people evacuated the north, moved over to the south where they were told that they were going to be safe, making that region of Gaza even more densely populated. And the IDF is saying out loud to the world, we will intensify our bombardment of the southern region soon, where there is an even more densely populated part of Gaza, which means that there are going to be far more civilian deaths, far more. We all know this, just think about it logically. But let me give you more. But to the southeast lies Khan Yunis, where the Israeli military has already indicated it intends to expand operations. Earlier this week, residents of 4 neighborhoods, home to over 100,000 people, awoke to find thousands of leaflets from the IDF ordering them to evacuate their homes. Now, Israel has indicated that it wants the people in southern Gaza to move again toward a tiny square of territory called Al-Mwasi along the coast between Rafah and Khan Yunis. So an even smaller piece of land. Think about it, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And I think what they're doing, their actual actions make clear what their intentions are, okay? Because to me, talk is cheap. You have to see what people are doing, what a government is doing, what a military is doing, and judge based on those actions. However, while I think what they're doing is clear, I do think it's also important to listen to the words that are being uttered by Israeli politicians and authorities. Because this isn't a one-off. There isn't just one example or 2 or 3. There are countless examples indicating that they have genocidal intentions. And the fact that Americans and the US State Department pretends like these statements aren't being made, these actions aren't being taken, is ludicrous to me, to say the least. So let's start off with the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog. Let's hear what he had to say.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true. They could have risen up, they could have fought against that evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat. But we're at war. We are at war. We're at war we're defending our homes. We're protecting our homes. That's the truth. And then when a nation protects its home, it fights. And we will fight until we break their backbone.
We will fight until we break their backbone. You know, they refer to them as human animals. They have absolutely no remorse when it comes to the slaughter of civilians. Oftentimes, they will conflate the civilian population with Hamas militants. And what about Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant? Why don't we hear from him?
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
I want to read you the statement, especially for those who listen to the audio version of the show. It's important for you to know what he said. He said, quote, "We are imposing a complete siege on the city of Gaza. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly." Now, some might look at that statement and say, well, you know, he's specifically referring to Gaza City. Isn't that like the epicenter of Hamas militants? Well, okay, well, let me give you another statement if that wasn't good enough. Here's another statement from October 13th where he said, Gaza as a whole, okay, Gaza won't return to what it was before. We will eliminate everything. So I'm curious what John Kirby thinks about statements like that. Because yes, it's easy to deflect by pointing to a terrorist group and calling out the terror that they committed, the heinous acts and the atrocities they committed against Israeli civilians. But why is it so hard for him to do the same in regard to the slaughter of innocent Palestinian civilians? Why is he so willing to keep referencing what Hamas has said in the past over and over again, while completely ignoring a statement from the defense minister of Israel? Gaza won't return to what it was before. We will eliminate everything. But I'm not done yet. Then you have reservist Major General Giora Eland, who's also the former head of the Israeli National Security Council. Here's a statement from Giora. The state of Israel had no choice but to turn Gaza into a place that is temporarily or permanently impossible to live in. Creating a severe humanitarian crisis in Gaza is a necessary means to achieve the goal. I don't know, do we think Eland is a liar? Or should we take what Eland has to say at face value? Seems pretty damn clear to me. There's more. Gaza will become a place where no human being can exist. Do you guys need more evidence? Is it hurting the Israeli government's feelings for me to call them genocidal because what they're engaging in is genocidal rhetoric and actions? Maybe they should reconsider their military behavior. Maybe they should reconsider the slaughter and indiscriminate bombing of Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip. Maybe if they did that, people wouldn't be using this kind of rhetoric to criticize what they're engaging in. And to be sure, I will continue using this rhetoric because it's the appropriate rhetoric. It is fact-based rhetoric that I'm literally providing evidence for as we speak, but I'm going to continue providing even more evidence since apparently you need to build a mountain of evidence to prove your case here. But I just want you all to consider, what would you think if the shoe were on the other foot? If Hamas had the military capability and the kind of backing that the Israeli government currently has, and they carried out these atrocities against innocent Israeli civilians, would anyone in the US State Department hesitate to call it a genocide? I would argue that they wouldn't hesitate. But I've got more. Knesset member and former public diplomacy minister Galit Distal Atbarian posted on Facebook that Israeli officials must invest all their energy in one thing: erasing all of Gaza from the face of the earth. Let me read that again, okay? Israeli officials must invest all their energy in one thing: erasing all of Gaza from the face of the earth. I mean, how many different politicians did we hear from again? I mean, that's quite a few, no? But there's more. That the brave monsters will fly to the southern fence and enter Egyptian territory, Atbarian continued, an apparent reference to Israel's reported plan to permanently expel Palestinians who survived the assault to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, imposing a second Nakba on the population. Or let them die. Gaza needs to be wiped out. Sounds like genocidal rhetoric to me. What does genocide mean to you exactly? There's more. This is also from Galit. Revengeful and vicious IDF is required here. Anything less than that is immoral. No, you would think that's enough, but I'm not done yet. There's more. Let me give you more examples. This was reported in the New York Times. Some Israeli hardliners advocate keeping control of Gaza and permanently expelling its Palestinian residents. A Likud lawmaker, Ariel Kalner, has called for another Nakba that would overshadow the original mass displacement in 1948. Right now, one goal, Nakba, Kalner said on October 8th, Nakba in Gaza and Nakba to anyone who dares to join, he added. And a far-right government minister, Amishay Eliyahu, said on Wednesday, this is an older excerpt, so it wasn't literally this past Wednesday, this was earlier, but nonetheless, that Gazan land should be given to former Israeli soldiers who fought in Gaza or to former Israeli settlers who lived in the enclave before Israel withdrew from it in 2005. Then Eliyahu said that Israel should consider dropping a nuclear bomb on Gaza, an idea that drew condemnation from Netanyahu and other members of the government. Now, Eliyahu was temporarily suspended for the nuclear bombing statement. But as far as I know, that is the only politician, only public figure in Israel who has used genocidal rhetoric and has been punished for it. All those other people are free to say these things, continue to say these things, appear on Israeli television on a regular basis and say these types of things. But here in America, we get a completely different story. You know, I have to buy a subscription to the Financial Times to read real reporting about what's really being said by Israeli officials. Because some of the most heinous statements, to be quite frank, are not being repeated or shared in the New York Times. But I do have more evidence, more examples. Politico reported just today that the United States has sent Israel data on aid group locations in Gaza so that the IDF can avoid bombing them. Okay, the point is, hey, we're sharing intel with you. This is a UN building. This is where innocent civilians are sheltering. This is a hospital. Please don't bomb these buildings, considering the high volume of Palestinian civilians who are sheltering there. They bombed anyway. But I mean, why wouldn't they? There's no consequences. It's not like the United States punished them or served up consequences for ignoring that intel and deciding to bomb where civilians were sheltering. So of course they're going to do it. The Biden administration has been providing Israel with the location of humanitarian groups in Gaza for weeks to prevent strikes against their facilities, but Israel has continued to hit such sites. Politico also reports officials have helped transmit coordinates of groups that provide food and medical care in Gaza and operate out of hospitals, smaller offices, and live in guest houses. Among the sites provided to the Israeli government are medical facilities, including Al-Shifa Hospital, parts of which Israeli forces took over on November 15th. We all know what happened to Al-Shifa Hospital. We're still waiting on evidence that under the Al-Shifa Hospital was a Hamas militant command center. Where's the evidence of that? The IDF has failed to provide it, and they've moved on to bombing other hospitals. Again, with absolutely no consequences from the United States government or State Department. And the information, by the way, included GPS coordinates of a number of medical facilities and information on movements of these aid groups. But Israel's continued bombardment of these humanitarian facilities raises more questions about whether Washington has the political sway many in the administration want with Israel. And the divide is particularly stark given that the goal is protecting aid workers, one of the most fundamental tenets of international humanitarian law. And as we know, at least 53 journalists have been killed as a result of the IDF's aerial bombardment, not just in the Gaza Strip. There were journalists who died in Lebanon as well. And perhaps all these actions and all these statements that have been very clear to me in terms of the intentions and the actions of the IDF and the Israeli government. Maybe that's not enough for you. Maybe you have to hear from someone who isn't just a dumb talk show host, right? I'm just a dumb talk show host. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just relaying the information. I'm sharing with you the details of what they're doing and saying, but maybe that's not good enough. So why don't we actually read from an Israeli historian and genocide expert who wrote this piece in Jewish Currents. His name is Raz Segal. The title is A Textbook Case of Genocide. Israel has been explicit about what it's carrying out in Gaza. Why isn't the world listening? And notice the date for the piece. It's dated October 13th. So it's less than a week after Hamas's atrocities. So a lot of the bloodshed that we've been sharing with you in recent weeks hadn't even happened yet. But Raz Segal, with a sober eye, looked at what was going on and what the Israeli government was planning to do in Gaza. And he was already raising alarm over it. So let's give you a few excerpts. The assault on Gaza can also be understood in other terms, as a textbook case of genocide unfolding in front of our eyes. I say this as a scholar of genocide who has spent many years writing about Israeli mass violence against Palestinians. Under international law, the crime of genocide is defined by the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, as noted in the December 1948 UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. In its murderous attack on Gaza, Israel has loudly proclaimed this intent. And they have. I've shared examples of that with you. He then turns to how the media in Israel is commenting on Palestinians and what they think should happen to Gaza. An interviewee on the pro-Netanyahu Channel 14 called for Israel to turn Gaza to Dresden. Channel 12, Israel's most watched news station, published a report about left-wing Israelis or left-leaning Israelis calling to dance on what used to be Gaza. Meanwhile, genocidal verbs, calls to erase and flatten Gaza, have become omnipresent on Israeli social media. In Tel Aviv, a banner reading "Zero Gazans" was seen hanging from a bridge. Remember how disgusted we all were when we saw anti-Semitic banners hanging from freeway bridges in the United States during that whole debacle involving Kanye West spreading anti-Semitic garbage? Remember how horrific that was, how much we hated it? Why is it okay for those types of banners to be, put up on bridges in regard to Palestinian civilians? Why the double standard? So look, John Kirby and the White House's genocide denialism might seem super shocking for those who are taking a sober look at all of this. But I really do want you to look at the history of the United States, because historically speaking, the US has spent a lot of time engaging in genocide denial, not just when it comes to this war, but for over a century, the United States wouldn't even recognize the Armenian genocide. And what's so ironic about all of this is that it took the Biden administration, Joe Biden himself, to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. And he deserves a lot of credit for that. It would have been far better, though, if he didn't engage in denialism when it comes to what is currently transpiring against Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip. And I want to share one final thing with you, because here's the thing. It would be really embarrassing, and it would be terrible optically speaking, if the Biden administration admitted that what's currently taking place is genocide, while also engaging in some of the backroom deals that are happening behind the scenes. What am I talking about? Well, Haaretz reported this. US President Joe Biden's energy security advisor is visiting Israel to discuss potential economic revitalization plans for Gaza centered around undeveloped offshore natural gas fields. There it is. This is exactly what Naomi Klein wrote about in The Shock Doctrine, which if you haven't read, I highly, highly, highly recommend you do. This is disaster capitalism in a nutshell. This is an opportunity. Seize the day. One people's loss can be our treasure. And it's absolutely disgusting and sick, but I have to say I'm not surprised. It's really incumbent on us to expect more from our government, to hold them accountable when on one hand, they talk about the lack of humanitarianism in other countries, the brutalization of Muslims in countries like China, but then they turn around and greenlight the brutalization of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and to be quite frank, the West Bank as well. That's been ongoing. This is the reality of the situation. It sucks and it's sick that our government lies to us. But when people tell you who they are, as Israeli politicians have been doing, we should believe them.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members, because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us. Become a Young Turk.